Tatang, Ilustrisimo and Felicissimo Dizon. Antonio Tatang Ilustrisimo, the founder of what has been named Ilustrisimo, and Felicissimo Dizon, the master and founder of Mohara. Two legendary names in the Filipino martial arts whose status has reached near mythic proportions. Part of the reason for this is that their reputation as fighters, both in the streets of post-World War II Philippines and on the battlefields of World War II, fighting side by side with Americans and against invading Japanese soldiers, are absolutely legendary. With their own dueling reputations, where they fought life and death with sticks, swords, and knives, these two names are some of the most recognizable and mythical names in all of Filipino martial arts. In this video, I'll be sharing with you some of the comparative analyses that I have made between these two arts, Ilustrisimo and Felicissimo Dizon's Mohara. Part of my fascination with this comparison is, according to Mang Romy Macapagal's exceptional book, Ilustrisimo, the archive system of Antonio Tatang Ilustrisimo. This book chronicles some of the adventures that both Tatang Ilustrisimo and Felicissimo Dizon had. In addition to the mythology, Angel Cabales and Felicissimo Dizon trained together, and if I'm not mistaken, according to the books by Mark Wiley, Filipino Martial Arts and Filipino Martial Culture, Felicissimo Dizon taught Angel Cabales the advanced stages of the de cuerda style, which Felicissimo Dizon was known for. And according to Mark Wiley's books, this training period was between 1937 and 1939 because after 1939, Grandmaster Cabales left for the United States. So this is a very interesting period where several masters got together, among them Tatang Ilustrisimo, Felicissimo Dizon, Angel Cabales, and Flora Villabril. My own personal experience has been mostly in Felicissimo Dizon's Eskrima arts, specifically doce pares, doblete, and the advanced art that he created, Mohara, all of which were taught to my father in the 1950s in a one-on-one setting. A big part of what made this possible was that my grandfather fought in World War II in Mark King's guerrillas, and according to Mang Romy Macapagal, so did Felicissimo Dizon. Both of them fought in World War II under Mark King's guerrillas. My father became a private student of Felicissimo Dizon when my grandmother and grandfather encouraged him to study with the master for a very specific reason. We, the Garcia family, come from a very, very long lineage of several generations of Filipino martial arts masters, many of whom fought in World War II. And they weren't necessarily the best influence, but in addition to that, there's a strange mixture of being hot-tempered, fighting, warring, and also Filipino superstition relating to anting-anting, very indigenous spiritual practices that my grandmother, who was the apo of that entire lineage, made the decision that her son was going to have none of it. Her son was going to move away from that blood lineage. So her decision was to have him train with Felicissimo Dizon. So now the training that my father received from Felicissimo Dizon was about 2 to 3 times a week on a private basis with the master. The master also visited my grandfather because they were both veterans of Mark King's guerrillas. When he was done speaking with my grandfather, he would then go ahead and proceed to train my father for about a good couple of hours. And this went on for about a good year and a half until my father became a professional attorney. So my own experience as it relates to Felicissimo Dizon's art of doce pares, doblete, and Mohara really came from one-on-one instruction from my father starting when I was 12 years old. So when I draw a comparison between Felicissimo Dizon's Mohara and Tatang Ilustrisimo's art of Ilustrisimo, it is coming from one, this fundamental source, and the second one actually comes from several private instructions that I received from Burton Richardson, who trained not only under Tatang Ilustrisimo, also from Guru Tony Diego. The majority of my comparison is going to come not only from these two sources, but also in my own deep analysis of these specific arts. The one thing that stands out to me with these two arts is just how strangely they complement each other. I invite you, my subscribers, to view Tatang Ilustrisimo and Felicissimo Dizon, both of whom were colleagues and frequented the docks where they worked and actually trained together and sparred together, being the elites that they were. I invite you to take a look at this video and this comparison, less about who was better, but really about the opportunity to take a look at the two arts of two masters at their best. There are two key things that I'm going to be focusing on for this video because the comparative analysis between these two arts, which has taken up a good portion of my own private study, can be narrowed down to at least these two readily accessible comparisons so that you have a broader understanding and appreciation of both these arts. Both gentlemen were famous for their use of the stick, as that is what they often used to train with, spar with, and often fight with. But both men were also very adept in the use of the sword. This one is a Zombie Tools Sharkolo, which is very much designed after the Tagalog Pinuti. Very accessible to both Felicissimo Dizon and Tatang Ilustrisimo during that time. Although Tatang Ilustrisimo was very famous as a swordsman, in fact, the Ilustrisimo martial art is famously known for being a sword art. Felicissimo Dizon was also, by my father's recollection, also a bladesman. So in this comparison of Ilustrisimo, which is a blade art, we will also be using a sword as far as those comparisons are concerned. The two things that I will be focusing on today as it relates to this comparison is, number one, the position of the hand relative to the right shoulder. In the Ilustrisimo system, the idea is to keep the hand relatively far away from the shoulder and also in line with the shoulder. The fundamental idea that drives this is that the targeting of the Ilustrisimo system happens to be anything along the shoulder line. Although in Filipino martial arts, it is famously said that what we are trying to do is to defang the snake being the hand and the fang being the stick. If you hit the hand or injure the hand in any way, the fighter loses the weapon and is now incapable of fighting. But in the Ilustrisimo system, the hand, which represents the head of the snake, in the Ilustrisimo system, they're a little concerned with the rest of the snake, the entire thing. So this is a targeting system wherein it indexes between the hand and the shoulder, and anything in between is a target. And what reveals itself as a target really comes down to the orientation of the hand relative to the shoulder. So if I hold the stick in this manner, not a lot of puño in the Ilustrisimo system, where I put it just in line with the shoulder, then I face you, and this happens to be my checking hand position, you don't really have access to that shoulder line. So there's not a lot to attack. This is the position that tends to be held in the Ilustrisimo system, with the right hand in line with the shoulder to protect this entire shoulder line. The left hand happens to be out here to protect this shoulder line, which then invites the opponent to come in down the middle, and lo and behold, you run into a whole host of problems. The Dizon Mohara system works with a relatively similar concept. There is an extended puño. I will get to that in a second. There's an extended puño. The hand is slightly lower than the shoulder, a bit to invite, but unlike the distance that is intentional between hand and shoulder, in this instance, in Mohara, there is a closing of that distance with the stick below the shoulder. This is a very interesting position to be in also because not only is the hand not a target because it's very far away, not only is the shoulder line and the arm line not a target because it's tucked all the way in, it really only leaves you with two other targets. The head, anything along the center line, but also the left shoulder. The hand positioning of the checking hand is also very interesting. In the Mohara system, it is placed along the ribs, either facing in towards the center line or facing up. So it's these two positions that we're going to be covering today. And this is what we are looking at as it relates to sword and stick methodologies. In the Kalis Ilustrisimo system, in this position, the primary job of the left hand is not just to check and control the opponent's weapon arm. There's also a power assist once the stick crosses center line, and there is a power assist that goes across. There is a variation of this in the Mohara system, meaning whenever the stick crosses center line, instead of doing a power assist, what Dizon liked to do is having this extended puño, and as this crossed center line, he handed it off to the left hand and then crossed it over. During a sparring session, you're probably going to be focusing a lot on the weapon hand. But Dizon's idea is, if your focus is on the right shoulder and the weapon hand, you don't have enough time to recalibrate when that weapon hand is now switched to the left side. So you have two gentlemen who are at the peak of their arts who approach the same strategy and the same execution with two separate biomechanical sequences. Tatang Ilustrisimo like to come into center line and push across. He can simply come down, or if it goes across, he can use the power assist. In the Dizon system, this is far lower, more attack by draw, and as this hand comes across the center line, you have this, and now it switches over to the left. Very interesting stuff that we'll be covering today. But the main thing that I want us to really look at and how this really plays out is if we were to apply this to a sword. I chose the Zombie Tools Sharkalope because unlike a lot of modern iterations of Filipino swords, they tend to leave out this very pronounced puño. And I think a lot of that is because of this idea that the Filipino sword happens to be a one-hander. But in my studies and research, specifically in the Mohara system, what I found is that you can also hand and half it, and in some instances, two-hand it. This is why the Mohara system has a dalawahan system. And in the dalawahan system, dalawa means two, where Tatang Ilustrisimo likes to come across and push with a power assist. In the Mohara system, not only did Dizon like to hand it off and go to the left side, he also liked to hand it off and then hit with two hands. So you have kabilaan or dalawahan. If we were to apply the same exact sequence using two separate systems, what you'll see in the Ilustrisimo system is, as it comes down center line, there is a power assist. There is another system where there is a way to use the pauyon technique, wherein as it comes across, there's some pushing using the hooking capabilities of the sword to hook across. But it comes down to this mechanism where when this hand comes across, there is an assist from the left hand. But in the Dizon Mohara system, we find something very unique. Holding in this position, where now the puño is leading, we cannot tell what the length of the sword happens to be. This is one heck of a gambit because he's not leading with the point or the edge. It actually violates a lot of good common sense as it relates to blade work, where he now puts the sword right behind him. In all of my sword studies, this is an absolute no-no. However, this is how Dizon liked to play. So the idea is, you can imagine, as he comes across with the sword, he hands it off to the left hand, and then, just when you think it's going to be an angle number one, he turns it into an angle number two. Even as part of a defense, if I'm going to come up and use this type of roof block, you can see where this can go. Thinking of these two important details as it relates to a comparative analysis of these two systems, you start to get a sense of the kind of similarities there are between these two legendary fighters, but also just how starkly contrasted they are in that Tatang Ilustrisimo liked to use just one hand and did not bother with being ambidextrous, whereas Felicissimo Dizon based his entire art of Mohara on being ambidextrous. If you are curious as to which art I think is superior, it really comes down to this important detail. How ambidextrous are you? If your right hand is just as good as your left hand, the same way Marvin Hagler was, then go with the Dizon Mohara system. But if your right hand is your best and your left hand has no business being in the fight, I would stick with the Kalis Ilustrisimo system. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for letting me share. A thorough analysis of the guard positions of both the Ilustrisimo and Dizon systems will give us some insight into the sophisticated thinking of these two FMA legends. On the left is going to be the Ilustrisimo guard, and on the right is going to be the Dizon Mohara guard. Note how Ilustrisimo's conservative use of the puño, while Dizon preferred a more extended puño so that he can hand it off to his left hand using the kabilaan method. Both gentlemen understood the triangle system as it relates to the positioning of the head relative to both elbows being close to the ribs. As mentioned earlier in this video, make note of the right hand position relative to the right shoulder, how Ilustrisimo's is higher by the shoulder while Dizon's is lower than his right shoulder, while their left hand are also varying in that Ilustrisimo likes to match his right with his left, while Dizon likes to keep his left hand lower than his right. Please take a very close look at their positions because this will give us a good understanding of how these two men proceeded with their arts. In this next section of the episode, I will be moving in the Ilustrisimo method on the left and the Dizon Mohara method on the right. By having these two in tandem, one can imagine what a sparring match may have looked like between these two legendary masters. Tatang Ilustrisimo was notorious for standing his ground with very minimal body movement as he proceeded to control the measures simply by advancing. Dizon's Mohara was the very definition of using the other hand, using body angulation and changing the orientation of the weapon and switching hands. He can go ahead and create countermeasures to this type of forward aggressive style created by Tatang Ilustrisimo. Both gentlemen fought in a tall posture to maximize efficiency of movement and power generation. That said, the proportion of stick and sword methodologies in terms of their biomechanics varied greatly. A lot of the Ilustrisimo system required core-centric movements, and that's what you can see in his movements, whereas in the Dizon method, since he worked primarily with the stick, most of his movements were arm-centric. A lot of the power generated through the Ilustrisimo system comes primarily from the core, but the ability to do this comes from the positioning of the hand relative to the right shoulder. So making sure that that right hand stands right in front of that right shoulder, it ensures that the right shoulder is actually lowered and connected to the core and the thoracolumbar fascia. Anything above the right shoulder fires the flexor mechanism, so it is important that the right hand stays at the shoulder line or below it to engage the core and the lat when he fires. By maintaining a tall and undisturbed posture and executing optimal biomechanics, the Ilustrisimo system relies primarily on simple and direct attacks without using much fanfare, relying primarily on timing and good coordination. The Dizon Mohara system relies on an unreal level of ambidexterity by constantly repositioning the stick from one hand to another. Notice that the right hand is lower than the right shoulder. This allows the efficient transfer of the stick from the right hand to the left hand. The hands and arms are constantly close to the body to ensure that no targets are being offered to an aggressive opponent. By implementing fluid shoulder dynamics between right and left shoulders, this ensures that although he is extending his hand forward, he is capable of keeping his arm close to his body to ensure that the bicep and brachial lines are constantly protected by his torso or by his movements. The complexity of movement required in the Dizon Mohara system, along with physical attributes relating to athleticism and motor control, makes me believe that it is the less scalable model and system compared to the more direct and simple movements that are required in the Ilustrisimo system. This, I believe, is one of the main reasons why we see more students of the Ilustrisimo system versus the Dizon Mohara system. Part of the complexity of the Dizon Mohara system as it relates to scalability is the fact that the majority of the strategies and movements are not commonly found in Filipino martial arts. I suspect that he most likely was influenced in his sparring and fighting days by Indian dock workers. and influenced by their martial art, specifically the Kalari Payut martial art, which is just as old as the Indian civilization itself. They use all types of weapons like swords, shields, and use fighting weapons like short sticks, and use the two-handed use of the short stick like the Dalawahan method that is found in the Dizon Mohara system. Although we can make some comparisons to the Ilustrisimo system, I think it is very clear that the Ilustrisimo system does not take from any other influence outside of indigenous Filipino martial arts, as well as Spanish influences, clearly just by taking a look at some of the terms that are used in the Ilustrisimo method. The Dizon method, on the other hand, although using some Tagalog terms in the use and description of their techniques, a lot of the movements and the strategies simply do not coincide with a lot of Filipino martial arts systems, specifically with the two-handing use of the stick. As mentioned earlier in the episode, it is the Kalis Ilustrisimo system that is far more blade-based. So all of the movements that you're seeing here, the biomechanics as it relates to hip rotation and triple extension, that is because the majority of the training is for the sword. So even though I am using a stick, I am not changing my biomechanics simply because it is lighter. So all of that power and speed that you're seeing is a result of using the biomechanics as if I am moving with a much heavier and much unwieldier sword. That is a big part of what makes Kalis Ilustrisimo such a powerful method. It's a little different with the Dizon Mohara method because although it is very stick-based, it is a little bit more arm-centric. As you can see, these are some movements that you cannot necessarily use with a sword, because if you transfer it over from one side to another, you're basically touching the blade of the sword and it is not practical for you to do it. So there's going to be some adjustments that you will see as it relates to the Kabilaan method and the Dalawahan method, but there's a lot of arm-centric movements that are happening here, so it's a little bit more stick-based, still some core-centric movements that are happening, but it's a good seamless correlation between core-centric and arm-centric movements. As we move on to the sword, using the zombie tool Sharkalope, which is very much like a Pinuti sword from the Philippines, you can see me calibrating it so that as I attack the right shoulder, notice that I'm calibrating it so that I'm positioning my hips first, so that it's not coming from the arm, it's not coming from the wrist. Although the Sharkalope is a very light sword, I can transfer it over to my left hand using this ice pick grip, and funnily enough, I've seen Tatang Ilustrisimo play with the sword in this manner, although I don't think it is part of the curriculum. I could be wrong, but you can see the lightness here. Even though it is somewhat light, I'm still going to use the same biomechanics as if I was using that stick, because the assumption is that an even heavier sword using the same biomechanics, you can still control the sword in that manner. So you're going to see some speed of movement here, but do make note that the stick movements that I did earlier is no different from the sword movements that I'm doing with the Sharkalope now with the use of this power assist. See how it just shoots out? It just shoots out that way because of the biomechanics and the posture relegated to Kalis Ilustrisimo. The Dizon Mohara system, once it is adjusted to the use of the sword, is similarly devastating and just as baffling, because now the left hand comes into play either in a two-handed manner. Anytime that handle crosses over into center line, you never really know which angle or which hand is going to be attacking you. So in this manner, crossing over to center line, we're going to use Kabilaan, where it transfers over single-handed to the left hand. So we'll do that a couple of times, but what makes it devastating is it goes back to the right hand as well, so you never really know what angle you're going to get hit with. Or sometimes transferring it over so it's Dalawahan two-handed, now there's a half beat, so there's a complete restructuring of the beat structure. A big part of the joy of my estacada practice is that I've been able to integrate these principles not only using the Ilustrisimo method but also the Dizon Mohara method when I practice with the zombie tool Sharkalope. The Sharkalope is that one sword that I really like because of that extended handle, so I can do the Dalawahan method with that sword, or if I feel like transferring over into the Ilustrisimo biomechanics and combine them both, I can use all of that movement, the lutang, the power assist, but go to Dalawahan or even Kabilaan when I feel like it. And what a pleasure it is to move with such a well-designed sword. As funny as the name sounds, Zombie Tool Sharkalope, it is the perfect sword for my Ilustrisimo Dizon Mohara practice. It is such a joy to move with, and I really enjoyed putting this video together for all of you, because my hope is that we can all enjoy this combined practice from these two fantastic masters of Filipino martial arts, Felicissimo Dizon and Tatang Ilustrisimo. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Stick around, stay tuned, more videos to come.